Hello and welcome. This is a live interactive webinar. There will be polling questions to the attendees and an open Q&A discussion will be held at the end of the presentation. You can use the Q&A button to send a question at any time. These will be answered at the end of the webinar. Welcome to the QbD webinar, Improving Final Product Quality by Embracing Knowledge Management Throughout the Product Lifecycle. This is the first webinar co-hosted by Cherry Circle Software and Exemplar Compliance. So first, I want to thank you for joining us in this historical event. Our two companies share a vision of a more efficient, data-driven industry where we reduce waste and minimize patient risk. And by leveraging data, we can increase our process understanding and implement continuous improvement. Today's presenters are Rebecca Waterbury, founder and VP of Quality at Exemplar Compliance, that's me, and Yash Sabrawal, founder of Cherry Circle Software. Both companies are here to present an overview of knowledge management and QbD and to demonstrate where the industry is going today. We're going to start off our presentation by doing a quick poll. Okay, if you look at your screen, there's a PLM phase poll. Are you involved in one or more of these phases of product lifecycle management? And you can pick as many as you are currently involved with. So please use the check boxes on the left and submit your answers. Okay, we're going to close this question in a second if you want to make your final selections. Okay, we're closing the poll. Okay, we'll share the results. Are you involved in one or more of these phases of product lifecycle management? 33% of the guests today are involved with process development. We've got process characterization, process validation, continued process verification, and other. Okay, excellent. Sounds like we have a diverse group. So today our topics of discussion are going to be knowledge management and pharmaceutical quality. We're going to talk about quality by design and pharmaceutical development, process development and process understanding, Pharma 4.0 and the product lifecycle management, and QbD vision for PLM. And as I mentioned, we'll have a short Q&A at the end of the presentation. So let's talk about the concept of knowledge management. It's a systematic approach to acquiring, analyzing, storing, and disseminating information related to the products, the manufacturing processes, and the components. But with so many streams of data, it's important to understand where data comes from, how it can be securely stored, and how to evaluate effectively and how to disseminate it to your team to make sure the data is being used to make good decisions. So knowledge management suggests a systematic approach to handling multiple streams of data. And we're all familiar with this diagram from ICHQ-10. At the top in the arrows, you see the phases of product development. You have pharmaceutical development, technology transfer, commercial manufacturing, and product discontinuation. Just below that, you see the insertion of the investigational products in GMP. And then in the third layer, you see the PQS or pharmaceutical quality system elements. At the very bottom, you'll see these enablers. These enablers help to support the PQS and the entire pharmaceutical life cycle. These are often overlooked enablers, are knowledge management and quality risk management, two things we're here to talk about today. And you'll see how these enablers support product realization, establishing and maintaining a state of control, and facilitating continual improvement. So the QbD is a term that we hear thrown around the industry, but what does it really mean? The key part of this definition is predefined objectives, product and process understanding, process control, and risk management. And QbD is really just the alignment of these goals. So this is my favorite thing to say, is that process development is not enough. Okay, so it's not enough to have a QbD and enhanced process understanding in the development phase. This concept should carry over into scale up, transfer, clinical, commercial manufacturing, and product retirement. So the diagram on the right is a combination of the ICH-Q10 figure and QBD lifecycle. In the new diagram, it's important to remember that this is a continuous effort throughout the product lifecycle. This is continuous improvement, right? So increased knowledge drives process understanding and improves process performance. So why do I care? Why does all this matter? Well, first of all, it's a part of international standards. We use the process optimization to reduce development and manufacturing costs. We speed up FDA approval and commercial manufacturing because good clinical data is not enough. As we've seen in recent headlines, having good clinical data is not enough. The FDA still has to approve it. You still have to go through scale up, and you still have to make a viable, safe, and effective commercial product. Safety and efficacy lead to a better patient outcome. We need to ensure reproducibility, and we need to look at continuous process control, or CPV, and lifecycle management. And then, of course, as part of change management, assess deviations and process changes. So we talked about requirements and industry standards. Here's a few on the left. You see the QBD language in our regulations, guidance documents, and industry standards. If you look at the right side, you'll see a listing of specific ICH quality guidelines. The concepts of QBD and knowledge management are carried throughout these guidelines. And in turn, these guidelines are adopted by regulatory bodies worldwide. So in particular, you can look at Q8, pharmaceutical development, quality risk management, pharmaceutical quality systems. All of these contain that QBD language. So how do people implement this today? We're going to launch a second poll question here. How do you, at your current job or at a job you've previously had, how do you implement this today? What types of tools are you using? So the poll question has launched. What tools do you manage your knowledge around process development today? Pick all that apply. We'll leave this open for just a few more seconds. Okay, we're going to go ahead and end the polling and show the results. Okay, much as I suspected, it is overwhelmingly Excel spreadsheets. And the reason I'm chuckling here is because that's what I would do as well. Over my career, I've spent, I think, 18 years now in the life sciences industry. It's overwhelmingly been Excel spreadsheets, and some medium and larger companies, homegrown databases. So very, very interesting. Okay, so how do people implement this today? Mostly we see Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, and very large risk tables, especially when doing FMEA and risk assessment. So let's talk about differing approaches to pharmaceutical development. Let's look at the standard minimal approach compared to the enhanced QbD approach. Just making sure you can see the table. There we go. So in the minimal approach, you're looking at for pharmaceutical development, it's mainly empirical, whereas the enhanced quality by design approach is systematic. It's relating mechanistic understanding of material attributes and process parameters to the drug product CQAs, or critical quality attributes. Again, the minimal approach is developmental research, often conducted one variable at a time. And under the enhanced QbD approach, you're talking multivariate experiments to understand product and process. You're looking at establishing a design space and possibly even using PAT tools. For the manufacturing process, under the basic approach, it's fixed, and under the enhanced QbD approach, it's adjusted within the design space that you've defined. For the minimal approaches under manufacturing, it's validation, primarily based on initial full-scale batches, and focuses on optimization and reproducibility, while the enhanced QbD approach looks at the life cycle approach to validation and ideally continuous process verification that we mentioned earlier. It focuses on the control strategy and the robustness of your process and your product, and it uses more statistical process control methods. I wanted to skip down to the control strategy quickly. Under the minimal approach, the drug product quality is controlled primarily by intermediates and process materials and end product testing. That's kind of what we're used to seeing in the industry. And then under the enhanced QbD approach, you're looking at drug product quality ensured by risk-based control strategy and having a well understood product and process. And I'm sure you'll agree that's all where we want to drive the industry. The quality controls are shifted upstream with the possibility of real-time release testing or reduced end product testing. So here's 2 takeaway statements. Tech transfer starts at development. So don't forget, tech transfer isn't an activity that happens when you're doing scale up or transfer. It really begins at the very beginning of the development process. And a poor process understanding equals a poor product. So what if I'm a small company? Do I need to do all of the things to be considered following QbD? Well, no, you should implement what's appropriate for the phase of development and the size of the organization. But if you're collecting data anyways, why not do it in a smart way that you can leverage it later? So we'll move on forward to the next slide, pharmaceutical development. We'll delve in here a little bit based on the audience. Under the typical approach, you want to define the quality target product profile, or QTPP, as it relates to the quality, safety, and efficacy, considering the route of administration, dosage, form, bioavailability, strength, and stability. Next, you want to identify potential CQAs of the drug product, so that those product characteristics having an impact on quality can be studied and controlled. Then you want to determine the critical quality attributes of the drug substance or any excipients, and selecting a type and amount of excipients to deliver to the drug product to the desired quality. And then you want to select an appropriate manufacturing process and define a control strategy. So these are kind of the bare minimums for the pharmaceutical development process. Now, if we skip to the next one, if you want to talk about enhanced quality by design, what does that mean? Well, it means that we need to additionally include a systematic evaluation, understanding, and refining of the formulation manufacturing process. So we need to look at material attributes, process parameters, and we need to see how they affect CQAs. We need to determine functional relationships that link to material attributes and process parameters to product CQAs. And using the enhanced product and process understanding in combination with the quality risk management, we can define an appropriate control strategy, which includes proposal for design space or real-time testing. So the result is a more systematic approach that facilitates continual improvement and innovation throughout the product lifecycle. Now I'm going to turn this over to my colleague and visionary, Yash Sabharwal, who is going to delve into the product lifecycle management and show some practical examples of how this is being managed today. Yash?
Thank you, Rebecca. Great overview of current techniques and processes and approaches and how things can be improved with the addition of QbD. We're going to start off this section with another poll, and the poll question is related to whether you use quality by design today, and I'm going to launch that poll now. Okay, well, we'll end polling now and share the results. And interestingly, looks like it's split pretty evenly, half and half. So we'll continue the conversation around this now. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that exist out there with implementing quality by design. And it really starts with the idea of product lifecycle management. And so if you think about product lifecycle management, we have outlined sort of the basics steps here, from research and development to process development and scale up, through the 3 different stages of process validation and how they scale, and the tech transfer that takes place, and which is often challenging, from laboratory scale to pilot scale, then on to process validation. If you look at the software solutions, and the reason this slide has been put here is that one of the challenges with the transfer of information and the recording of information has to do with the disparate set of software solutions that are currently out there. So if you think about how laboratory scale or research and development activities are currently tracked, it's often in Microsoft Office using ELN and LIMS potentially. When you move into process development and scale up, you may add EQMS and some analytics tools, but it's still primarily Microsoft Office that's being used. And then as you scale into process validation, you are adding MES potentially and ERP, but still using documentation and spreadsheets and so forth to a large extent to manage and track the information. And so there's a significant gap right now because there's a lack of structured knowledge management software to capture process evolution throughout the life cycle. And so what does knowledge management look like today? Heavy reliance on Microsoft Office and quality systems. And so you really end up with more quality by documentation than you do quality by design. You see a number of scenarios where data is dispersed. An incredible amount of time is wasted finding and looking for information. And this also leads to a lot of information silos. So you know, people who are in process development are not necessarily clear on what's going on with quality and regulatory and vice versa. The current tools do not lead to very good visualization of process and risks, and it becomes really challenging to manage complexity, especially as we're looking at some of the newer paradigms of treatment with cell and gene therapies. And ultimately, this leads to poor process understanding, making tech transfer difficult, and ultimately ending up with underdeveloped products. So if you think back to the slide that Rebecca presented around ICH-Q10, the more recent conversations around Pharma 4.0 have been looking at how to extend the quality focus and the minimal approach to a more holistic approach for lifecycle management and production control strategy. And whereas in the old paradigm, knowledge management and quality risk management were the enablers, in the new paradigm, knowledge management and quality risk management are the bridge between the new enablers, which are an integration of IT systems, a focus on product design with the emphasis on CQAs and CPPs and an understanding of how they relate to each other, and then building on this to get full process understanding and platform understanding. And so the software tool of Cuban Division is a recent addition to the tools that are out there that focuses on the collection of the enablers and the collection of knowledge management and quality risk management around these enablers to serve as a bridge into the elements of Pharma 4.0. And putting all this together certainly helps with compliance around all of the various ICH guidelines from Q8 up through Q12, and then the new Q13 and Q14 guidelines, which are also currently being considered. So if you think of a more structured approach, you know, the current approaches of Excel spreadsheets and Word documents and document management systems are essentially collections of unstructured narratives of information. As a result, you know, the documents have a lot of additional data and information in there that are difficult to mine and certainly difficult to track over time. So a structured requirements management approach allows you to attach risk to requirements. It allows you to attach data to requirements. It allows you to attach testing and analytics. And ultimately, the equipment and the components that are used for manufacturing can be linked as well. And this structured requirements approach is a much more powerful way of tracking knowledge related to process development and scale up. And so a structured requirements management system starts with the requirement itself, broken out between acceptance criteria, criticality assessment, process capability, and risk control. Then if you fold in the justifications with data and analytics related to patient safety or actual manufacturing data, and ultimately your ability to detect and control the risks, then you can layer in an integrated risk assessment, moving from criticality, which is based on impact to patient safety and efficacy, to process risk which is based on your actual capability, and then folding in RPN, which, detectability, which gives you your RPN layer. And so these are, this layered approach can be very powerful. And as an example, we show you, a structure here in the Cuban Division environment where you can move from your target product profile to your quality target product profile to your process description, definition of control methods, and ultimately the ability to report around all of this information. So going to the structured requirements approach, if you think of a final quality attribute for a drug product, you may select this particular one here, and you can see that in a structured approach, you can create a definition for a attribute. You can define its acceptance criteria. In this section, you can attach source documents and justifications. This is something that's very difficult to do with Excel spreadsheets, and often you may have acceptance criteria or you may have risk assessment in a spreadsheet, but you'll have the justifications and any source documents that support this information somewhere else. And this is the issue of dispersed information that makes it difficult to track things over time. From acceptance criteria, you can move to a risk assessment where you may look at impact and uncertainty to get a criticality score. Again, tracking justification, any recommended actions going forward. From there, you can fold in your capability risk and actually bring in batches of manufacturing data to support the process capability for this specific requirement. And then you can fold in the risk control, looking at detectability, justifications, and even linking in control methods directly with the requirement from the database. So in one location, you have an entire dossier of information, starting with the general description of the attribute all the way through risk control. And a structured approach gives you the ability to do exactly this, which is much more powerful than dispersed information in a variety of different documents. So proceeding from there, once you have a structure set up, as we just showed, you can then layer in a progressive risk assessment approach where you start with criticality, and then you fold in your occurrence to get a process risk, which is really nothing different than the ISO 14971 risk. And then you fold in detectability with process risk to get RPN, or an overall risk number. The importance of layering a risk assessment like this is that it helps you understand that improved process does not reduce criticality. So if something is out of specification and it is likely to harm the patient, that's going to be the case regardless of how good your process is. And so what you, from a process perspective, what you're trying to do is reduce the occurrence as low as possible, and then whatever residual risk remains, you try to detect it with whatever control strategy you want to put in place. And so these layers of risk are things that evolve over time. And if you build a layered risk approach like this within a structured environment, as we just discussed, then you have the ability to easily and automatically generate things like risk tables, where you can see your final quality attributes and see criticality, process risk, RPN, and their progression over time, along with control strategy and links to the patient requirements all in one place. And so this is a very powerful way of automatically generating reports, which currently are done manually because you have to start, you create something in Excel, then you provide justifications in Word, you may later summarize in PowerPoint or use Visio for flowcharts, and that can be obviously very cumbersome and has issues related to data integrity, obviously. And so a compliant environment where you're tracking all this information and automatically generating these reports certainly saves time and solves the compliance issue relative to data integrity. Once you have requirements set up, and then you have your risk assessments completed, then you have automatically essentially linked your patient, product, and process requirements in the format of a target product profile, a quality target product profile, and then intermediate attributes and process parameters related to your process. Not only can you define your your product requirements through the QTPP, but you can also define your process directly in a structured environment tool like Cuban Division. And so here's an example of a process that's been defined, a simple one with aqueous compounding, sterile filtration, and some filling and stoppering and packaging. And then the structured environment allows you to further build in layers so that you can define your process components that may be related to a particular unit operation and the intermediate quality attributes associated with that unit operation. And then further, for a particular unit, for a particular component, excuse me, you can define process parameters and material attributes. And so once you've built a structure like this, then this allows you to very easily generate a process flow map, as opposed to having to go and manually draft one in Visio. You can just automatically generate one because all of the structure has already been built, and elements, excuse me, can be automatically color coded based on their criticality. So, for example, API chem stability has been considered as a critical material attribute to aqueous compounding, and that's why it's labeled red. So you can see the power of a structured repository because it's tracking all this information as you're defining it, as you're flagging it, as you're risk assessing it, and automatically creating other reports from that, which then can be shared for collaboration or further discussion. One of the other interesting approaches that a structured database allows you to take on is the idea of combining the information that may be in a spreadsheet and the information that's in a fishbone. While the information in a spreadsheet shows you risks of potential inputs to outputs, it does not show you the spatial relationships that a fishbone map may give you. But the fishbone map doesn't really give you the risk information that the spreadsheet does in its color-coded form. And so if you can combine these two to create what's called a network graph or a knowledge graph, and the combination allows you to color code by risk and show the relationships in a cause and effect diagram that's much more powerful than the two individually can do, given their lack of dimensionality. And so in a similar fashion, looking at a risk map, here's an example of a risk map of that process that we were just looking at. The top layer here, the target product profile elements. The next layer is the final quality attribute elements. These are all the inputs and outputs of unit operation 1, unit operation 2, unit operation 3. They're color coded by risk. So you can see reds and oranges are high risk, yellows and greens are going to be lower risk. If you hover over, you can see exactly what the information is related to that particular object. A map like this gives you a lot of power because then you can go ahead and filter. And so you can filter by risk. If you just want to see the high and very high risks, you can deselect all the other elements. And so you can focus on only those things that will matter in your process or that are the highest risk right now and require the most attention. Or similarly, you may decide that there's an issue in your sterile filtration step and you want to focus on that and only look at those unit operations that are there. The power of a network graph is that it follows the flow of the process, unlike a fishbone where all the elements are just sort of mashed together in one and the flow is not necessarily apparent. You can also look at the different layers of risk in a map like this where you can see impact, uncertainty, criticality, and flip through these different layers to see where you may have issues as you look at your risk assessments. And finally, the aspects of assessing deviations and change management is something that is easily enabled with this network graph approach. If we think about if we've had a deviation, say in filtration time, you can zoom in on that element. You can see based on the relationships that you've built, what are the inputs to that unit operation, which affect the filtration time. And then you can also see how filtration time affects the rest of the process to get a sense of what the impact of that deviation is on the batch, and finally on potential patient safety and efficacy. So the network graph approach is a much more powerful approach than the combination of spreadsheets and the fishbone diagram, because you can truly see cause and effect in a way that you cannot easily see with those other approaches. And so Cuban Division fills that gap that we identified earlier relative to knowledge management, because you can define and link your requirements in a structured data repository. You really bring together integrated functionality where you can track data, risk, and testing in a way that's not easily possible right now. You can, with our novel tools and the structures and links, you can provide traceability and visualization of complex systems. And ultimately, this can give you a robust process understanding with holistic process control strategy, and that will certainly facilitate tech transfer going forward. We want to point out also that we're not the only ones that have recognized that a structured approach to knowledge management has significant potential in helping manage process development activities. The FDA has recently launched its own knowledge-aided structured assessment initiative, where they have internally built a database to track information in a very similar way. And they are actually currently mapping data from ECTD submissions into this database to, in a very similar way, assess the applications from a risk and control perspectives in a structured way and an objective way, so that they're not having to pour through thousands of pages of documents just to get a quick assessment of where risk may be in a particular application. Their approach also follows a development workflow. It allows them to track historical data, facility information. It facilitates their assessment of risk and reduces subjectivity in the review process. So the FDA is already sort of heading in this direction and looking at the combination of product manufacturing and facility risk as the three pillars of their knowledge-aided assessment. So going back to one of the enablers of Pharma 4.0, the integration sort of end-to-end of IT and GXP systems. There's a lot of value to this integration. It certainly simplifies workflows by allowing simplified requirements traceability, risk assessments, change management, and control strategy. It allows you to track and manage very easily with process flow and capability maps. It certainly allows you to have a better sense of manufacturing readiness, and the ability to generate reports for tech transfer has significant potential to reduce the challenges around those activities. And it certainly helps with platform development, where information and learnings from one project can be applied to another project because all the information is in one place. And finally, understanding and demonstrating that you understand your process and you have it under control is a third key point of this key value of this integration, where all the information captured in one place certainly builds institutional knowledge. It demonstrates to external parties that you have a robust process, that you understand it. It is in compliance with the regulatory standards of ICH and the FDA requirements. And ultimately, it can lead to faster development and lower development costs for your new products going forward. So at that point, we'll end the webinar and ask if you have any questions, or if you submitted any questions, we can. If you'd like to answer any questions right now, or ask any questions, excuse me, we can take them going forward. Yep.
So if you guys could log into the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, you can type in questions yourself, or you can also type in a question anonymously for Yash and myself to answer. I do have a question just to get us started and kick us off. Tell me your feelings, Yash, about using software tools that are based in the cloud versus those that are kept locally? I'm just curious what you're seeing in the industry and if there's any security concerns or anything that we need to address when using cloud-based software tools.
Well, that's a great question, Rebecca. It's something that we get asked in the industry often. I think more and more you're seeing companies more and more comfortable with the cloud. The reason is that a lot of the EQMS providers have moved into the cloud recently. Viva, which is one of the biggest providers, moved all their infrastructure from their own servers to AWS.
Interesting.
And so a lot of those folks are already on the cloud. But also, I think there's a growing understanding that security is challenging in today's environment. And you want to be with the providers who have the best tools and the best understanding of security, and these are the companies like Amazon and Google and Microsoft and so forth. And so it is becoming more clear that pharma companies, their bread and butter is not IT security;
right.
It's in drug development, yeah. And they really need to be looking to these cloud providers. It's also incumbent, though, it's not just about the cloud providers, but it's also incumbent upon the companies developing applications built on top of these to ensure that they have the best security, and that requires your own robust testing, not only internally but externally as well.
So for GMP application, for example, you'd want to make sure you're using a validated software tool, I assume.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely. Okay. We do have a couple questions that popped in. First question is, can you share the slides? Absolutely. We can share the slides. We'll make those available. We'll send a thank you for attending follow-up email and make sure that you have a link to those slides. The second question is, besides fishbone diagrams, what other tools do you use for risk assessment? FTA, FMEA, and others. So I know Yash did use fishbone as an example, but we all know that there's lots of other tools out there.
Yes, so as an example, I can, if you can still see my screen, this particular risk table also can give you FMEA style tables, where by unit operation you can see inputs versus outputs for unit operation, and you can see criticality, process risk, and RPN, failure mode, scale dependence. So you can automatically build FMEA or FMECA tables in this software tool as well, because all the information is already there in the structured database.
Okay, great question. Our next question is, does QbD Vision become the, quote, original report, or is it a transcription from the original report required into QbD Vision? So I guess they're asking, is QbD Vision become the original record? So that, for example, a GMP record, or is this a transcription from the original required?
Right, so because QbD Vision is a 21 CFR Part 11 compliant solution, it can be the original record and source of truth, if you will. However, if you are using another solution, EQMS, then you can export this information. A lot of these reports and tables are exportable as Excel, Word, and PDF formats, and pictures in many cases, and so they can then be put into other documents that are then routed for approval in those systems. Because our source documents widgets also allow you to link and not just upload documents or upload files, you can put in links to documents in your EQMS as well, if that is what you're using as your source of truth.
So I guess the answer is it depends on your internal procedures. If you in your internal SOPs say that QbD Vision is the original record, it can be because it's 21 CFR Part 11, has electronic record, electronic signature. However, if you already have like a Viva Vault or a Documentum system or something else, you would just merely link to that system and still keep the original record. Is that correct, Yash?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Correct. Great questions today, guys. Next question. Excellent seminar. Are there examples of using this tool for change control and investigations? Joe, great question.
This is a relatively new product. The first release was released in September, and we have just started acquiring customers. Our second release came out just a couple of weeks ago. And so right now our customers are coming online and using this for risk assessment as their first sort of value that they see with the software is being able to consolidate their risk assessments in one place and obviously track them in a way that's more easily visualized and managed than it would be in Excel. But we expect as they progress and they bring more and more information into this software, they can then use it for change control and investigations. We do also have some analytics. So as an example here, you can see that if you pick a requirement, if there's manufacturing data in the system, you can get your process capability metrics, and you can even see the actual data points, and the things that are the points that are out of specification are marked red. So certainly you can catch your deviations and then utilize the risk map to potentially understand what the cause and effect might be related to those deviations. But the documentation around change control and investigations will still primarily be in any QMS system.
Okay, great question. And I got to tell you, looking at this software, I wish I had it 10 years ago. I personally have been struggling with Excel spreadsheets and FMEA tables for far too long. Next question. This looks like a fantastic product. If we view analytical procedures as a process, can QbD Vision be used for lifecycle knowledge management for analytical procedures? If so, have you tried it and was it successful?
We have not yet tried it. We've started building a demo project in here, so you can imagine a scenario where the project is, even though it says TPP and QTPP, the QTPP is essentially an ATP. And actually, I can go here to the example that we were starting to build. There's been a lot of interest, by the way, in using this tool for QbD for analytical methods. And so here's an example that we started working on where for an HPLC method, for example, we define specificity, linearity, precision, et cetera, as the sort of the fun quality attributes of the method. Under the Process Explorer, we defined standard prep, sample prep, and then the actual method as the steps in the entire method. Under HPLC method, we defined the column, the sampler, detector, LU and diluent as components, and then you can under the column we picked the age and the resin matrix as material attributes of the column. So you can see the flexibility of this system allows you to build a analytical method QbD project within this current environment, and we will be adding we'll be streamlining this a little bit in the future, where you can pick a project that'll be an analytical method project, and then it'll say ATP up here instead of QTPP, things like that.
Great questions, and the short answer is it looks like yes, they've already started building that out, so that's fantastic. The next question is, does your software work equally well for medical devices? And I'm going to add a little tag onto the end of that. Does your software work for combination products? Because as we know, there's so many different types of combination products now entering the marketplace.
Yep. And so that's a great question as well. We have identified all of those opportunities for this software. Our current focus has been on the pharma space, but we expect that you can build actually a medical device project within this, even though it has the pharma lingo associated with this. But next year we will be creating a version based on this same architecture to manage medical devices. And then once you have medical devices and pharma projects that you can manage within the software, then we can combine those two to do combination products.
And so now would you just have, an auto injector or a patch or an inhaler as part of a component in the overall process? Is that what would happen?
Yes, you would. And so if we go to back to the project that we were in before, you would see in the Process Explorer that under the materials section, there's categories for drug substance, excipient, container closure, device, and packaging. And so under the device section, you would track the requirements there.
Mm-hmm.
This set of categories is for drug product, but we also have a separate group for drug substance. So you can manage both drug substance and drug product project development in this software tool.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. There's a last question that I have, and I just want to encourage folks, if you have more questions, please go ahead and enter them now using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can either enter them under your name or you can enter anonymous questions. I'll be happy to try to fit these in before the end of the presentation. The last question I currently have on the screen is, have you heard or do you know if the software is being used during complaint or product process failure investigations? I think we talked a little bit, maybe you could expand upon that, Yash. So how would this software be used for complaint and product process failure investigations?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, so this question is sort of similar to the question related to I think investigations and deviations. Again, because the software is currently being adopted by companies that are sort of earlier in their development process, the focus really is on risk assessment. It is not yet being used for products that are in commercial manufacturing, but we expect that at least in the near term, complaint handling would be through an EQMS system, and the product process failure investigation can be through QbD Vision, because that's where all of your requirements and the cause and effect relationships are established.
Excellent. So the consumer could essentially use their own process and procedures to kind of structure the evaluation, the failure investigation, and then go into QbD, do the data analysis, look at upstream and downstream linkages to that unit operation or that component that failed. So I've seen something really cool in your process, and I just wanted to ask you about it along the lines of the failure investigation. If I had a failure investigation that happened, if I had something that happened in a lot a month ago or a year ago, would I be able to go back in your system and see the process at a certain point in time and do an evaluation based on a lot or based on a time frame when I think an issue happened?
Yeah, so you would be able to search. You would look at searching by for a particular batch or data point, or you may even look at your risk map and go back in time. Let me clear this out. So we have a timeline feature as well too, where you can see the timeline of the process, and you can see all the things that happened over time, and so you can go back in time to see how your risk has been changing for all the different parameters. And so you may go back to a particular day and recognize that one of the parameters had higher risk than was appropriate, and could be a natural starting point for that investigation.
Excellent. I personally think this is a great feature. I love it myself, coming from years of quality and process development. I love to see a history of the process and the product, and really to be able to capture that data in a way that stays with it. So you build all that legacy information. As you know, people leave the company and computer systems change, and it's always a struggle for us finding that legacy data in a way that's easily managed. That's great. Thanks, Yash. Any other questions? Just want to open it up. Any of the attendees or panelists, if you have a question, the Q&A button is at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to enter any questions now.
We'll just end with one final poll. And that is a 4.0.
Okay, excellent. So we're sharing those polling results now. Is your organization interested in using Pharma 4.0? It's kind of split, and I appreciate the honesty and the candor, because I think Pharma 4.0 it's a vision for the industry, but not all companies have the resources and the capability to get there. And I think a lot of people are on their own time frame with this, depending on where you are in your process. Do want to thank everyone for their time. We'll be sending out a follow-up thank you for attending email. Feel free to use the information there to contact us if you have any additional questions or follow-up. Again, I'm Rebecca Waterbury from Exemplar Compliance. My colleague is Yash Sabharwal from Cherry Circle Software, developer of Cuban Division. If you'd like to learn more about the consulting services or the software, anything that we talked about today, we love talking about QbD and knowledge management. It is a passion for us. We want to see the industry move in the right direction. So please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.
Thank you as well, too. I appreciate your time and your questions, and we hope to talk to you again soon.